position. Let me say my position with you. I was not a relationship. That's like, what did I ever do? I never did anything to you, but you always reacted as though I did, because you did. Okay, what did I do? That's what I'm confused. I feel like you made comments on things that you didn't know about and shouldn't have gotten in between, especially when you did. Why so?
Stop scrolling, because the Tamar Braxton and Kandi Burruss feud just took another shocking turn. For years, fans have heard different versions of what went wrong between these two powerhouse entertainers. There was the tension during the Escape tour, the explosive confrontation on Celebrity Big Brother, and later the shocking accusations involving Kandi and Todd Tucker. But now, the spotlight is turning toward Toni Braxton. Why? Because when family drama and celebrity friendships collide, Toni's perspective could completely change how fans look at Tamar's side of the story. And the timing couldn't be crazier. After Tamar and Kandi were recently caught in another awkward public encounter at Essence Fest, and Kandi later made it clear that she still has serious issues with Tamar, the old feud is suddenly back in the headlines. So what really happened between Tamar and Kandi? Why did things become so personal? And could Toni's perspective finally explain how this feud became impossible to fix? This is where the story gets messy. The Tamar Braxton and Kandi Burruss feud has been simmering for years, but a recent public encounter has suddenly pushed the old tension back into the spotlight. And this time, Toni Braxton's name is being pulled into the conversation, even though there is no reliable evidence that Toni has publicly revealed some secret confession about what Tamar actually did to Kandi. What we do know is that the tension between Tamar and Kandi goes back to their 2017 touring days, when Escape toured with Tamar and Monica. The two later discussed those issues during Celebrity Big Brother, with Tamar saying she felt Kandi had involved herself in matters that didn't concern her, while Kandi maintained that she and her group weren't intentionally treating Tamar badly. That history matters because this wasn't some random disagreement that appeared overnight. There was already baggage. There were already hurt feelings. And apparently, neither woman completely forgot what happened. Fast forward to July 2026, and the cameras once again caught Tamar and Kandi standing together at Essence's Black Women in Music event. The event itself was supposed to celebrate black women in music, with major names including Brandy, Monica, Missy Elliott, Kandi Burruss, and Tamar Braxton participating in the weekend's festivities. Essence officially listed Kandi among the honors, while Tamar was also present at the celebration. On paper, it should have been a beautiful moment. Two successful women from the same musical generation. A major celebration. A room filled with legendary performers. And an opportunity to put years of drama behind them. But then came the interaction that sent fans straight back into the feud. During a group photo moment, Tamar appeared to reach across Monica toward Kandi to greet her. Kandi's response looked noticeably uncomfortable, and the short clip quickly spread online. TMZ described the moment as awkward and noted that the two women have been feuding. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion. Was Tamar genuinely trying to make peace? Was Kandi refusing to fake a friendship? Was this simply an awkward moment between two women who don't get along? Or was there something much deeper happening underneath that brief interaction? Those questions became even more interesting because the two women later offered very different perspectives. And that's where the story really starts. Kandi later addressed the encounter on her Speak On It podcast, making it clear that she wasn't interested in pretending everything was fine. TMZ reported that Kandi said she doesn't like Tamar and characterized the interaction as something she didn't want to make falsely cordial. That response completely changed the way many people looked at the original clip. Because what initially looked like an awkward celebrity greeting suddenly had context. Kandi wasn't simply being cold for no reason, according to her account. She believed there was still unresolved history between them. And that takes us back to the beginning. The 2017 tour wasn't just a professional collaboration. It became the starting point of a feud that would follow both women for nearly a decade. When Tamar and Xscape were touring together, tensions reportedly developed behind the scenes. Later, during Celebrity Big Brother, Tamar and Kandi discussed those problems from completely different perspectives. Tamar believed Kandi had crossed a line. Kandi believed the situation had been misunderstood. And when two people remember the same situation differently, reconciliation becomes incredibly difficult. Because each person feels justified. Each person believes they have already explained themselves. And each person waits for the other to acknowledge their version of events. That's how a small disagreement can become a years-long feud. But here's where the Toni Braxton angle becomes interesting. Toni is Tamar's older sister, and one of the most respected voices in the Braxton family. Whenever Tamar becomes involved in controversy, fans naturally wonder what Toni thinks. Would she defend her sister? Would she tell Tamar to let the situation go? Would she reveal something Tamar has never publicly discussed? Those questions are fueling the dramatic headline. But we should separate the headline from what has actually been reported. There is currently no reliable evidence that Toni has publicly revealed a secret incident showing exactly what Tamar did to Kandi. So the strongest story isn't inventing a confession. It's examining the documented feud and asking why these two women still appear unable to move past it nearly 10 years later. And after the latest Essence encounter, that question has become impossible to ignore. Because this wasn't happening in some private backstage argument. It happened during a major public celebration. The cameras were there. Other major artists were there. And millions of people eventually saw the interaction online. The moment lasted seconds. But the history behind it stretches back years. And that is exactly why one small gesture could reignite an old controversy. Because sometimes the most revealing part of a celebrity feud isn't what people say. It's what they refuse to say. And Kandi's latest comments suggest that, at least from her perspective, the relationship with Tamar hasn't been repaired. Now the big question becomes: what does Tamar say happened, and where does Toni Braxton fit into the story? Because if the Braxton family has a different understanding of what happened all those years ago, the next chapter could become even more explosive. For a brief moment at Essence Festival 2026, it looked like the Tamar Braxton and Kandi Burruss feud might finally be cooling down. Then the cameras caught them together. And suddenly, years of unresolved tension came rushing back. The setting couldn't have been more symbolic. Kandi was being honored at Essence's Black Women in Music celebration alongside major names including Brandy and Missy Elliott, while Tamar was also in attendance. During the group photo moment, Tamar appeared to reach across Monica to greet Kandi and take her hand. But Kandi didn't exactly respond like someone excited about a reunion. The interaction was brief. No screaming. No dramatic confrontation. No security rushing onto the stage. Yet somehow, those few seconds became one of the most talked about celebrity moments of the weekend. Why? Because everybody already knew the history. This wasn't two strangers having an awkward interaction. This was Tamar Braxton and Kandi Burruss, two women whose relationship had been complicated for years. And once that clip reached social media, fans immediately started asking the same question. Was Tamar genuinely trying to make peace, or was she simply being polite because cameras were everywhere? That's where the story gets complicated. Tamar later presented a very different version of the situation. During a July 29 appearance on The Morning Hustle, she said she didn't want beef in her life, and that she enjoyed her peace. She explained that she congratulated Kandi and moved on, insisting she had no regret about doing so. That sounds straightforward. Tamar's position was essentially, I said congratulations. I was being respectful. That's it. But Kandi didn't see it that way. And that's where the old feud suddenly became relevant again. After the encounter, Kandi addressed the situation on her Speak On It podcast. According to TMZ, Kandi said she didn't like Tamar and accused her of being fake. She also claimed that Tamar had recently called her a derogatory name while walking past her at an Atlanta event. That completely changed the interpretation of the Essence Fest moment. Because if Kandi's account is accurate, the public interaction wasn't necessarily evidence that the feud had ended. It could have simply been two people maintaining basic public etiquette while still having serious private resentment. And honestly, that is probably why the clip became so fascinating. People love reconciliation stories. But they also love seeing when two celebrities, who supposedly made peace, clearly haven't forgotten the past. The internet immediately began analyzing every facial expression, every hand movement, every glance, every reaction from Monica. And suddenly a simple greeting became another chapter in a feud that has lasted almost a decade. But to understand why Kandi reacted so strongly, we have to go back to the original conflict. The tension between Tamar and Kandi dates back to 2017, when Xscape toured with Tamar and Monica. According to reporting, problems developed during that period. Later, when Tamar and Kandi appeared together on Celebrity Big Brother, they discussed some of those unresolved issues. Tamar said she had been dealing with personal and professional problems at the time and believed Kandi was involving herself in matters that didn't concern her. Kandi had a different interpretation. She maintained that she and the Xscape members weren't deliberately treating Tamar badly, but Tamar interpreted their behavior differently. And that right there explains why the feud became so difficult to resolve. Two people can experience the same situation and remember it completely differently. One person thinks, I was protecting myself. The other thinks, you disrespected me. One thinks, you were being fake. The other thinks, I was simply being professional. And once both people become convinced that their version is the truth, apologies become much harder. Because apologizing can feel like admitting the other person's entire story was correct. That's how grudges survive. Years pass. Careers change. People move on. But the emotional interpretation of the original incident remains. And that seems to be exactly what happened here. The feud didn't disappear. It simply became less visible. Until Essence Festival brought them into the same space again. And then the cameras did what cameras always do. They captured it. The moment spread. Fans picked sides. And the two women eventually gave competing explanations. Tamar's message was about peace. Kandi's message was about authenticity. And that difference is enormous. Because Tamar was essentially saying, I don't want to carry this anymore. While Kandi was saying, I'm not going to pretend everything is fine when I don't feel that way. Neither statement automatically proves the other person is wrong. It simply demonstrates how differently they view reconciliation. And this is where the title involving Toni Braxton becomes tempting. Fans naturally wonder whether Toni knows more. After all, Toni is Tamar's sister. She's watched Tamar navigate public controversies for years. She has been around the entertainment industry long enough to understand how quickly private disagreements become public narratives. So people want to know, what does Toni think about Kandi? Has Toni heard Tamar's side privately? Does she believe Tamar was treated unfairly? Or has she ever told her sister to simply let the situation go? Those are fascinating questions. But there is an important boundary. There is currently no reliable evidence that Toni has publicly revealed some hidden incident proving exactly what Tamar did to Kandi. So we shouldn't invent a Toni confession simply because the headline sounds dramatic. The documented feud is already explosive enough. And the newest development makes it even more interesting. Because Tamar has publicly said she wants peace. Kandi has publicly said she doesn't like Tamar and doesn't want to fake a friendship. That means the two women aren't even telling the same story about where the relationship stands. And that's the real drama. Not whether one woman can produce a more shocking insult, but whether reconciliation is even possible when the two people involved can't agree on what happened in the first place. Because until the original disagreement is resolved, every new interaction becomes dangerous. A handshake can become a headline. A smile can become fake. A side eye can become evidence. And a simple congratulations can become another chapter in a years-long feud. That's exactly what happened at Essence. And now, after Kandi's latest comments, the question is no longer whether the feud exists. The question is whether Tamar and Kandi have any realistic path toward ending it. And that's where the next part gets even more interesting, because their most explosive disagreement didn't end with the 2017 tour. It followed them into reality television, accusations were exchanged, and the relationship became even harder to repair. The Tamar Braxton and Kandi Burruss feud might have remained an old reality TV disagreement if it had ended with the 2017 tour and their later Celebrity Big Brother confrontation. But it didn't. Years later, another incident pushed the tension into an even more serious territory. And this time, the disagreement involved Kandi's husband at the time, Todd Tucker. According to reporting, Tamar accused Kandi and Todd of confronting her backstage in 2023. Tamar characterized the encounter as threatening, while Kandi disputed that version and said there was a verbal altercation, but that Todd did not threaten Tamar. That disagreement matters because it transformed the feud from an argument about personalities and professional relationships into something much more personal. Suddenly, the issue wasn't just, "You talked about me." It became, "What happened when we were actually in the same physical space?" And once accusations like that enter the picture, rebuilding trust becomes much harder. Because now each side has a completely different memory of the event. Tamar believed she had been treated aggressively. Kandi maintained a different version. And there was no easy way for fans watching from the outside to determine exactly what happened backstage. That's another reason the feud continued. Neither side appeared willing to simply accept the other's version. And that is often what keeps celebrity conflicts alive for years. One disagreement creates another. One interview brings up an old incident. Someone responds. Then another person responds to the response. Before long, the original argument almost becomes secondary. The history itself becomes the feud. And that's exactly what appears to have happened with Tamar and Kandi. By the time they arrived at Essence Fest in July 2026, there were already years of unresolved baggage behind them. So when Tamar approached Kandi during the Black Women in Music photo opportunity, viewers weren't seeing a random interaction. They were seeing it through the lens of everything that had happened before. TMZ reported that Tamar reached across Monica to greet Kandi, while Kandi appeared unwilling to engage in a warm reconciliation. The clip was incredibly short. But the internet immediately began analyzing it. Was Kandi rolling her eyes? Was Tamar trying to make peace? Was Monica uncomfortable? Was the whole thing staged for attention? The problem is that body language can be interpreted in countless ways. A smile doesn't prove friendship. An eye roll doesn't prove hatred. And an awkward expression doesn't tell us exactly what someone was thinking. But once the audience knows the history, every tiny gesture suddenly appears meaningful. That's what makes long-running celebrity feuds so powerful. The past changes how people interpret the present. If two celebrities with no history have an awkward interaction, most people forget about it. But if two people with almost 10 years of public tension exchange a strange look, suddenly everyone wants to know what it means. And the Essence Fest moment became even more significant because Tamar later addressed it. During a July 29 appearance on The Morning Hustle, Tamar reportedly said she didn't want beef in her life and enjoyed her peace. She explained that she congratulated Kandi and didn't regret doing so. That sounds like someone trying to close the chapter. But Kandi didn't interpret it that way. Kandi later discussed the encounter on her Speak On It podcast and made it clear that she was not interested in pretending everything was fine. According to TMZ, Kandi said she doesn't like Tamar and accused her of being fake. She also claimed Tamar had called her a derogatory name at an Atlanta event shortly before the Essence encounter. And there it was. The two women were suddenly telling completely different stories. Tamar: I congratulated her. I want peace. Kandi: I'm not going to pretend we are friends. Those statements don't necessarily contradict each other completely. It's possible Tamar genuinely wanted to be polite without wanting to rebuild a friendship. It's also possible Kandi genuinely didn't trust the gesture because of their previous history. Both things can exist at the same time. And that's why reconciliation isn't simple. You can't force two people to feel the same way. One person can decide they are finished with the feud. The other person can decide they are not ready to move on. And until both people reach the same point, the relationship remains unresolved. This is also where the Toni Braxton angle needs to be handled carefully. The dramatic title suggests Toni has exposed exactly what Tamar did to Kandi. But there is no reliable evidence in the current reporting that Toni has made such a revelation. What we actually have is Tamar's own public explanation, Kandi's response, and the long history between the two women. That's enough material for a fascinating story without inventing a Toni confession. And if Toni were ever to publicly discuss the feud, that could certainly add another perspective. But until she does, we shouldn't put words in her mouth. The more important question is whether Tamar and Kandi can ever reach a point where they genuinely stop talking about each other. Because right now, their conflict seems to operate like a cycle. Something happens. One person speaks. The other responds. Fans choose sides. The story disappears for a while. Then another public encounter brings everything back. The Essence Fest moment is the latest example. And judging by Kandi's August comments, the feud hasn't disappeared. If anything, it has entered another chapter. Kandi has made it clear that she doesn't want to fake a friendship simply because cameras are present. Tamar has presented herself as someone who wants peace and doesn't want to carry old beef. That creates an interesting contradiction. Maybe they don't need to become friends. Maybe they simply need to coexist. That's often the healthiest outcome when two people genuinely don't like each other. They don't have to hug. They don't have to take pictures together. They don't have to pretend. They simply need to maintain enough professionalism to share the same industry without constantly reigniting the conflict. But can they do that? That's the real question. Because the entertainment industry is small. Music events overlap. Reality television brings people together. Award shows create group photos. And sooner or later, Tamar and Kandi are probably going to end up in the same room again. The next encounter could be completely uneventful. Or it could create another viral moment. And after nearly a decade of tension, nobody can say with certainty which direction this relationship is heading. But one thing is clear. The feud that started around professional disagreements has survived multiple television appearances, public accusations, and years of distance. And now the Essence Fest incident has reminded everyone that the tension is still there. The question isn't simply what Tamar did to Kandi. It's whether either woman still wants to keep carrying what happened all those years ago. And that brings us to the final part, because Kandi's latest comments may reveal exactly why this feud has lasted so long, and why a genuine reconciliation could be much harder than fans realize. The Tamar Braxton and Kandi Burruss situation might have been easier to dismiss as an old reality TV disagreement if the tension had stayed in the past. But it didn't. Years after their original problems, the two women are still publicly giving very different accounts of where they stand, and the latest Essence Fest encounter made that impossible to ignore. The moment happened during the Black Women in Music celebration at Essence Fest 2026. Tamar and Kandi were on stage with major artists including Brandy, Monica, and Missy Elliott when Tamar appeared to reach across Monica to greet Kandi. Kandi's reaction looked noticeably uncomfortable, and the brief interaction quickly went viral. On its own, it was only a few seconds. But this wasn't an ordinary greeting. There was history behind it. And once fans remembered that history, every movement suddenly became part of the conversation. Was Tamar genuinely trying to be respectful? Was Kandi intentionally refusing to engage? Was the entire thing simply an awkward moment between two women who don't get along? Or was there something much deeper happening underneath? Tamar later offered her explanation. During a July 29 appearance on The Morning Hustle, she said she didn't want beef in her life and enjoyed her peace. She explained that she congratulated Kandi because it was a professional celebration, and said she didn't regret doing it. That sounds like someone trying to close the chapter. But Kandi had a very different perspective. On her Speak On It podcast, Kandi made it clear that she wasn't interested in pretending the two women were suddenly friends. She said she doesn't like Tamar and explained that she wasn't going to fake cordiality with someone she believed had repeatedly talked about her. And then Kandi added another allegation. She claimed Tamar had called her a derogatory name while walking past her at an Atlanta party shortly before the Essence encounter. If Kandi's account is accurate, that would obviously change how she interpreted Tamar's attempt to greet her. From Tamar's perspective, the Essence interaction could simply have been basic manners. From Kandi's perspective, it could have looked completely different. And that's the problem with long-running celebrity feuds. By the time years have passed, people aren't just arguing about one incident anymore. They are carrying an entire history of previous disagreements. One person remembers feeling disrespected. The other remembers feeling unfairly accused. One believes they already moved forward. The other believes the same behavior keeps happening. Eventually, even a simple handshake becomes loaded. That's exactly what happened at Essence Fest. And the feud itself goes much further back. According to reporting, Tamar and Kandi's tension dates to 2017, when Xscape toured with Tamar and Monica. The women later discussed their disagreements during Celebrity Big Brother. Tamar said she believed Kandi was interfering in matters that didn't concern her, while Kandi maintained that she and the Xscape members weren't intentionally being mean to Tamar. That difference in perception is critical. Because it means the feud isn't simply about one person being the villain. It's about two people who experience the same environment differently. And when that happens, reconciliation becomes extremely difficult. Imagine believing that someone wronged you. Now imagine that person genuinely believes they did nothing wrong. Neither person feels obligated to apologize. Neither feels responsible for fixing the relationship. And years later, the original disagreement is still sitting there. That's how grudges survive. The situation became even more complicated because the two women continued crossing paths through entertainment and reality television. They couldn't simply disappear from each other's lives. Their careers overlap. Their social circles overlap. And events like Essence Fest can put them on the same stage without warning. That's why the latest encounter matters. It demonstrated that time alone hasn't necessarily erased the tension. And Kandi's later comments made that even clearer. She wasn't simply saying, "We are not close." She was saying she didn't want to participate in what she considered fake friendliness. That is a powerful statement. Because it tells us something about Kandi's current mindset. She doesn't appear interested in creating the appearance of reconciliation just because cameras are present. And ironically, Tamar's explanation suggests almost the opposite. Tamar said she was simply being kind at a professional event. She wasn't asking Kandi to become her best friend. She wasn't suggesting they go to lunch. She was congratulating another woman who was being honored. Those two positions aren't necessarily impossible to reconcile. Maybe Tamar really has moved on emotionally. Maybe Kandi hasn't. Maybe Tamar sees politeness as separate from friendship. Maybe Kandi sees politeness from someone she doesn't trust as unnecessary. Both interpretations can exist. But the public rarely gives celebrities room for that kind of nuance. Instead, social media wants a winner. It wants a villain. It wants someone to have been exposed. And that's where the original title becomes especially interesting. Toni Braxton leaks what Tamar actually did to Kandi. It sounds like Toni has revealed some secret evidence. But there is currently no reliable evidence that Toni Braxton publicly released such a revelation. So the responsible version of this story has to focus on what is actually documented. And what is documented is already dramatic enough. Tamar and Kandi have had years of unresolved tension. They have publicly discussed their disagreements. They recently had an awkward encounter at Essence Fest. Tamar says she wants peace. Kandi says she doesn't like Tamar and doesn't want to fake a relationship. That's the real conflict. And perhaps the most fascinating part is that neither woman appears particularly interested in pretending otherwise. In an industry where celebrities are constantly expected to smile for cameras, take group photographs, and maintain professional relationships, Kandi's refusal to fake closeness is revealing. But Tamar's decision to offer congratulations despite the history is also revealing. It suggests that the two women may simply have very different definitions of what moving on means. For Tamar, moving on might mean, "I don't have to hate you just because we disagree." For Kandi, moving on might mean, "I don't need to pretend I like you." And honestly, both are understandable. People don't have to become friends again. Sometimes the healthiest resolution to a feud is simply distance. No insults. No retaliation. No fake friendship. Just professional coexistence. But whether Tamar and Kandi can actually maintain that distance is another question. Because every new encounter creates another opportunity for the story to explode. A photo. An interview. A comment. A podcast. A social media post. And suddenly, the old feud is trending again. That's exactly what happened in 2026. A few seconds on an Essence stage revived years of history. Then Tamar spoke. Then Kandi responded. And the internet picked sides. But one person has remained largely outside the center of the public exchange. Toni Braxton. And that is precisely why her name continues to intrigue fans. Toni is Tamar's sister. She's an established artist with decades of experience navigating the entertainment industry. Naturally, people wonder what she thinks about Tamar's side of the story. But unless Toni directly addresses the feud, we shouldn't claim that she has revealed information she hasn't publicly confirmed. The real story is already messy enough. And after Kandi's latest comments, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. This feud isn't completely dead. It may be quieter than it once was. It may not involve the dramatic confrontations fans saw years ago. But the resentment appears to remain. And until both women genuinely agree that the past is finished, another awkward encounter could bring everything back again. Which leaves one final question. Can Tamar and Kandi ever truly make peace? Or is the best they can hope for simply staying in the same room without starting another chapter? So now I want to hear from you. Do you think Tamar Braxton was genuinely trying to make peace with Kandi Burruss at Essence Fest? Or was Kandi right to question her intentions? And what do you think about the years-long feud between these two women? Do you believe this situation can finally be put to rest? Or is another explosive confrontation just waiting to happen? And most importantly, if Toni Braxton eventually speaks publicly about her sister's side of the story, do you think it could change the way fans view this entire feud? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next celebrity drama update. Share this video with someone who has been following the Tamar and Kandi feud. Because after everything that's happened, one thing is clear. This story may be quiet, but it definitely isn't over. I'll see you in the next video.